She drove out from Du Bois today to bring an outreach program to us. And you may have heard some things about this project before, but like me, you might not have ever heard the whole story. It's been covered now for probably longer than I realized. You can tell us that. But it's a wonderful story of some lost for a long time and recently rediscovered treasures having to do with Pennsylvania's lumber industry. So with that, we'll present Howard.
All right. Thank you. Good morning. That's claps for her. So again, my name's Holly, but it's Komonzci. I'm German, not Polish. No, just saying. Again, I'm with what's called the Lumber Heritage Region. And what is that? So that's, the state has 12 heritage regions across the state. And Tioga County, this part falls into what's called a lumber heritage region. My new friend Mike here was asking me, you know, because they're from Grove City, and why is the lumber heritage region not part of that? Because we all know, how did Pennsylvania get its name? Does anybody know? Penn's Woods, you're right, William's Penn's. So supposedly the story that I hear is that William Penn's father got in a little bet and ended up pretty much winning some of the new territory in America. And so Pennsylvania was his land and he won in a bet. That's what they say in a card game, but you don't think that's true?
What I learned was he lent money to King of England, and King of England couldn't repay the debt, so he gave to his son, William, the land of Pennsylvania.
Well, I think my story's got a little more punch to it. But anyway, so I'm charged with kind of keeping the heritage alive in the 12-county region. We do a little bit of everything. We do these presentations. This is a small part, is the education that we do, but just as an informative piece for the lumber heritage. Like we do economic development, recreation, and tourism as well. You know, like I help fund trails and other projects. So just keep that in mind. If you get to talk to me afterwards, you know, if you have interest in that, we do a nice little mini grant program. So I don't know if any of you have organizations and things you're involved in, but we do give out a little bit of funding for things, and so we've got our hands in a lot of stuff. So again, I'm going to say that I'm probably, as we've already found out, not the most knowledgeable person about the industry in this room. However, I do have these great photos, which you can't lie about something you see in person. So that's kind of what I'm going to use to tell my story and just tell you a little bit about what life was like. And so the Pennsylvania lumber boom, as you know, we said they came over here, and basically when people walked into, when you came to this area, all there were trees. And we're not talking about the little trees we have now, right? We're talking about trees that are 5 feet in diameter, 5 feet round. So pretty much the entire landscape was trees, Penn's Woods. And so they started, like the lumber process in the very beginning, in the early centuries, where they were sending wood to England for things like ship masts and to build the ships. So because our trees were so big, they just couldn't believe it. So a lot of our trees actually were imported or exported off of during the boom period. So the late 19th century, the early 20th century, these pictures were taken by a photographer by the name of Thomas Clarke, and he gathered this big collection, which I will just go ahead and talk about it now. You probably saw it on your way in, but this is the full collection, which is a book with all the pictures and the story written by a couple of Penn State professors. They were found in a barn up in upstate New York, actually. What's that? I'm not sure of the town, I'll be honest. So they were found in a barn, and the person was going through, and they thought they were just window panes until they pulled one out and realized, wow, this is a whole series of the lumber history. So that's basically how they were found. And this person, you know, obviously now they're in the hands of the Pennsylvania Museum Commission. And so we got them on temporary permanent loan from the commission in order to be able to show and present them. So just real quick, another plug. If you have an organization that would also like to, you know, host these, they can be hung for like an art display, or we can do a presentation again, so keep that in mind. All right, enough of that. So we know they came and found these wonderful trees, did a lot of bad things environmentally, I suppose, right? So does anybody know what we called the men who worked in this industry back then? The Woodhicks. Someone said Woodhicks. And so that's how it started. Nobody likes to be called a lumberjack when you're a Woodhick. Alright? So these guys worked a lot of long hours. Now, this particular picture just shows you, see, they're using the crosscut saw. This is called what, a crosscut or a two-man saw. And again, these trees were very large, and it began.
Peeled bark.
What's that?
They've already peeled bark.
Oh yeah, I didn't get to that part because that's the other part. But yes, so the Woodhicks would go out. They would get up in the morning. So let's see where we want to start next. Let's talk about the bark peelers. So she said there were Woodhicks and then
Bark peelers.
bark peelers. Okay, we're not lumberjacks, so those, I mean, especially those of us with the lumber heritage region, we don't want to hear lumberjack, even though it will never go away. We were Woodhicks and bark peelers. There was a time in history. We'll start with that. So what's the Pennsylvania state tree? Anyone know that? The hemlock. And you know, so the bark, at one point, the bark was equally as important in value as the actual tree. So like she pointed out, they would take the bark off those trees. Does anyone know why?
Tanning industry.
The tanning industry, which pretty big here, right? So probably a lot of our lumber heritage has to do with the tanning. And you're right, they would strip the bark peelers would strip the bark off, and that was then sold for the tanning, because that was a huge early industry, just as equally as important, as I said, as lumber. And so here's all these big trees. Now, we all know how big the mountains are here. Matter of fact, that's my mother sitting in the corner. She drove up with me today, and she's like, oh, look at all these mountains, because we came down, excuse me, you probably did too, huh? We were on these roads I've never even traveled before, straight here, and there's a lot of hills. So you think, how did they get, first of all, we know they had to cross-cut those saws, so they're getting up early, they got up at sunrise, and took the trees down, or got up and to go to work. But how do you think they got the trees from the hills and brought them down? So they had these. Has anyone ever seen an actual remnant of a log? It's called a log slide. They'd actually cut the logs, split them to make a slide from the top of the mountain that rode all the way down. And what time of year do you think they were doing the cutting of the trees? In the winter, they had to cut the trees. So these gentlemen would go out in the freezing cold temperatures, bright and early in the morning, and this is kind of an example of what they would wear and what they were doing. And they would come out, and of course, the winter was the best time to cut them because they had to get ready for the spring-thaw, which is where we're getting. So again, the log slides would work the best. They would prepare them usually in the summer because kind of their work's done at that point as we go along here more. But once in a while, your log would get stuck, or you would need help getting it down the mountain, so they always had a nice team of horses to help pull the trying to think which other, okay. So this is a typical log camp that these gentlemen would live and work in. Okay, so I'll tell you the story. What they would do is, this picture says a lot actually. There was, oh, this was, yeah, there it is. There's the guy. So they would live in these camps. They would go and build them. A lot of times, and we'll talk about that later, but they would actually take these camps from site to site, because what they were doing is, as you can see, that doesn't look like the hills today, does it? So they, you know, the history of the logging is they would clear cut, and they would clear cut everything. So you go to an area, and once you cut down all the trees, well, nothing else to do. You got to move on. But a typical logging camp would have, you can see over here, the stable. So there was always a nice stable where your blacksmith stayed and made sure he took care of the horses, because, you know, logging is still today one of the most dangerous industries out there. And you have to have a good team of horses. I mean, I know a gentleman from up where I live that actually still logs with horses. And they have to be your best friend, because like he'll go out in the woods on his own with just his horses and has to really rely on them. Because again, if you don't know, does anyone know, anyone here work in the industry or know anyone that still does?
Well, JR does.
Okay. So you know, people get hurt. You have to, matter of fact, the gentleman with the horses that I talked to one day said, you know, within the first 3 days, if you can be a logger. Because if you go out and you're scared, am I right? If you go out and you're scared, you're probably not meant to be there. It is scary every day. This is where, typically where you would have where all the guys would have dinner, or not the lodging hall, but the mess hall. Okay, so they would have all their meals be eaten in here, and then they all stayed in one camp, right? And the crazy thing about that is, you got 40 guys, or here, I don't know, that looks like about, close to 40 maybe, 30 some. And they're all staying in them houses right there. They're not doing much bathing, right? They're not clean, they're not changing clothes. And so, that's another thing I wanted to point out in that picture. Oh, there's one in this one. No, that's another. But in the middle here, where you can see this gentleman here. He was older, you can see he's kind of older than all the other.
White beard, is that what you're saying?
I'm guessing, right? I'm guessing by the white beard that he's probably one of the older gentlemen. And he would have been called the lobby hog. What did the lobby hog do? Well, he had to keep the bugs out of the beds. So he would be in charge of, when these guys all went out to work, he was likely in charge of a couple of things, which was cleaning the beds, which a lot of times, you know what they got cleaned them with? Kerosene. They would dump kerosene on the mattresses and stuff just to get the bugs out, so that, you know, keep the disease down and the bugs down. But his other job a lot of times, and what these guys did, as we know, was to entertain the gentlemen. So here you see them having a nice card game. This is probably on the Sunday, because that's the only day they got off in a week. They got Sundays for their own pleasure. And so a lot of times they would play cards to make sure that, you know, there was music, something to do, because obviously a bunch of men who probably haven't seen women in a long time at this point, you know, they're working sun up to sundown, so they're just working a lot. You have to keep order in these camps, and so that was kind of his job, was to keep order and keep them happy. And like I said, I don't know, I like this picture a lot, because it just says, you know, here's what we did on our weekend. We had some cards to play.
It's interesting, and it looks like they have two boards over a barrel, and sort of balancing it out.
That's exactly what they have there. You're right.
So somebody got up there and teetered down.
Probably. Yeah, because he has his leg on the one side, or no, they're both sitting on it. This gentleman's sitting on one, and yeah, I never paid attention to that. That's how you become a really good historian, when you can look at a picture and clear down to the end where you see that they're actually balancing that board with their own bodies. So these gentlemen, because they worked so hard, they would have to eat 5,000 calories a day. All right, so 40 men, now, I say 40 because that's roughly what most camps had, about 40 men. So 40 men would get up at sunrise, and they would have a very hearty breakfast, flapjacks, you know, high calorie. We're talking high calorie, stuff that I think pretty much anyone in today's society would have a hard time keeping their weight down. But these guys were clearly very skinny and healthy. You know, bacon, they'd have some meat, and then they would go to work. Now, one of the things that I've done since I've been here at the Lumber Heritage Region, we did a diversity study, because the stories were always women were not at the camps. There were no women at the camps. That's the story that they were told. But guess how most men found work? Anyone want to take a stab at that? They would go to the camp that had the best cook. All right, so word got around, because they weren't getting paid only $1 a day. So they clearly weren't doing it to get rich and moving companies. They wanted to eat, and they wanted to eat good. So a lot of these camps actually did have females, which I can prove by showing you this picture. And we did a really good diversity study. It's on our website if anyone's interested. But these women would get up before the men. They would cook all the breakfast. Men would go out in the fields, they'd clean it up, and they would get lunch ready. And a lot of times, they would take lunch right out to the men, so they didn't have to come back in. So they would take the lunch out, come back, prepare for the dinner meal. And so these women, I know there's a book that I once read, and in there it said, there was no way women worked in the camp because they couldn't lift the heavy items to feed 40 men. Well, they did. And the funny thing of it is, we have pictures shown where the women were actually cooking the meals and raising the 4 kids. So there's a couple of 3-year-olds and a baby in a high chair, and you know, so it was a lot of work. And they would prepare the meal, and then the men would come in and they would eat, you know, stuff like, again, a lot of meat, a lot of breads, pies, high-calorie food, and they pretty much would eat and go to bed, unless they could get a card game in, but my guess is only on the weekend, because they were so tired. So that's something that I guess in today's generation we don't see a lot of. I complain that I got to work from 8 to 4 from my home office, so it's it's a little different, right? But I think it's pretty interesting to know the women did have a place in the camp, and sometimes so did the kids. You know, and there was oftentimes back then, clearly when the mother would die, the father still had to work, and so the kid went with them right to the camp. And we have some, again, there's some great stories, and everybody has a story. I'm sure someone in here has a story they want to tell me before I leave, about how, you know, their mother, I know a story where one kid ended up orphaned and went with an aunt to a camp, and she helped cook and grew up in the lumber camp, and I don't know, it's pretty amazing. But we've got some great stories on different things like that on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel. So, okay, so now we talked about, and I know I'm out of order again, this is just kind of me talking today, and I hope you learned something. But they've got all these trees, so in the winter they're bringing them all down. Bringing them all down the hill. For what purpose? We got to ship them. Because, as everybody knows, Williamsport, Pennsylvania, down the road here, was the lumber capital of the world at one time. So during the lumber boom, Williamsport, Pennsylvania was the lumber capital of the world, and that's where all the logs were pretty much from especially from your area, we're headed down the Susquehanna River, the West Branch Susquehanna River, down to Williamsport. Like right now, right? Because as I'm driving, I'm seeing creeks that you don't see any other time during the year as we're driving down here. So they would, and again, when we're done, you guys can come up and look at the pictures a little closer because I might not pick them all up, but yeah, but that's what happens. So they'd assemble their teams and build something like this, which is a raft. And they would use the logs that they brought down the hill on those log slides and other methods and put them in the river. You know, you've heard of a splash dam where certain areas would be dammed up and all those logs would sit, which this isn't a great picture of a log boom, but you know, you just got to imagine. These logs are all sitting in the river dammed up, waiting to float down. And so, a couple of guys, usually one or two, sometimes more, would build the raft. Again, we use this one because there's a little, probably 7, 8-year-old girl, she's going to float down the river. And again, that was another thing women never did, or children. But they would build these big rafts and float the lumber down, you know, through the creeks to the main West Branch River, and they would all end up in Williamsport, PA, where the lumber boom was actually first invented. Okay, and what is a lumber boom? It was a place to collect the logs. And there were a lot of other booms you can spot throughout the river sometimes when you go and you wonder what that little island was. Like maybe it's rocky, or you can still see some timber in it. And that was to, again, to jam it up so when all the logs came down in the winter, then they would be able to flow down separate in the spring.
That may be Little Pine Creek, but no quote down there.
This is Williamsport.
Okay.
I'm pretty
That's
sure.
on the Susquehanna stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
So the structure on the left on the hillside, is that slide prevention in a sense?
Probably. I'm not 100% sure, but I would imagine because, you know, we're clearing everything.
Right, where the logs are laying there.
Nothing was left.
You gotta appreciate the navigational device that's evident here too. You know, that's the
I was
rudder.
looking for already. Yeah.
That's the rudder.
The rudder.
Oh, right here.
there,
Yeah, the rudder.
And it's manipulated with that rather large piece of wood in the man's hand.
And then, you know, a lot of times these were disassembled when they got to Williamsport,
Sure.
right? Because this was part of this is money in their pocket right here. So they would disassemble these and sell them for the money. So then you got to figure, you got this many logs, all right, you floated down, you got Mike, at least because I know his name, I can remember it, my brother's name's Mike, but Mike's got his logs, and my mom's got her logs, and you've all got your own set, so how do we know whose logs are who?
Paint.
What's that?
Paint.
Nope. They,
Spikes.
not quite a spike, but yes, you've got it. It was called a lumber stamp. And so on the end, they would have a hammer, almost like a sledgehammer. And on the end of the hammer would be your, yes, your company brand. So a lot of those can be seen in the, I don't have one, I have a gentleman trying to build me one so I can use it for these kind of talks. But it just was a hammer with like an A1. That's the one I see a lot, A1. I don't know what company that was. But each one had their own stamp, and there would be someone in Williamsport, there'd be gentlemen that got in the waters, and they sorted these logs out. And that's how you got paid, because your stamp was on your log and made it all the way down. Now you know there were disasters, and there's many stories, and I'm sure you can read some of them in your book. Again, I just have the small history of it. But this is what it looked like when the logs got to the mill. So all along the river there were also mills. So they didn't all make it to the boom, but you know, again, our lumber from this region built the United States of America. I mean, plain and simple. Our lumber built the United States, and I forget where I was going with that, but this is what a mill, I don't know where this mill is exactly, let me see if I can. This is Norwich, it's Norwich Mill Pond from the Goodyear Lumber Company. So Goodyear was a huge lumber company, I'm sure. You all know it.
Upper Potato Creek.
There you go, Upper Potato Creek.
That's cooking, yeah.
This was Goodyear's last big sawmill in Pennsylvania, in Norwich. Yeah. So, for many years, the only way they had to get the logs clearly to the export was through the rafting. But then, what came next? The railroad. So, as you can see, they would be able to get the logs down the mountain to the railroad. And where's my other train picture? That's not it. I guess this is kind of a train picture, but not the one I was going for.
It's got a train in.
Yeah. But then they would have to load those logs. Now they got to load them onto the train cars to get them to market.
Is that a view of Crossfork there?
This is Crossfork. This I knew Mike was going to know more than me. That's why I learned the name right now.
Put him up front.
That's why I put him front. He's my co-presenter. So yeah, this is Crossfork. But so the railroad came along and it made it a little easier, but they were still loading these logs. Right here's my picture. See, they had to get them on the cart somehow. There's that boss, that lobby hog sitting on the logs there from that same camp picture. Kind of cool, huh? So they loaded all those by hand. I mean, they got them on there, I'm sure, chains, and you've heard there's many tools they used, like the, man, everything's leaving the hook.
The barn heart.
Well, I'm getting there. Don't go to the barn heart yet. They were still loading them by hand at this point. And then came along, yes, the Barnhart log loader.
There you go.
Yeah, and this moved us, this is another Goodyear company here with the Barnhart log loader. And made it a lot easier for these gentlemen to load those big logs. I still wouldn't call it easy, probably, because I wouldn't want to do it.
That hugely increased the efficiency.
It sure
Because
did.
otherwise you were creating a ramp of smaller logs, you'd roll it up there with 2 or 3 men. pulling it
Yeah.
up. But that was a major.
It was a this was a major breakthrough, and you can see one of these. And I didn't mention it yet, and should have, but the Lumber Museum in Ulysses or Gailton, Pennsylvania, down the road a little ways here, you can see a Barnhart log loader. You can see a Shea locomotive. I mean, these guys they had a lot of. Once the trains came out, they all wanted one, and the fanciest one, and the nicest one. So the trains made a huge difference. And remember when I told you in the beginning that they moved a lot of the logging camps? Well, they got smart when the railroad came through, because now sometimes they would just move them as part of the train and right down the road to cut the next hill full of trees bare. So, kind of cool how they lived. And they would have a general store on site sometimes, and the lobby hog, he did a lot of the laundry. They just, he had places to do the laundry. And if you ever want to, after this talk, maybe you'll be so excited about it that everybody will want to run to the Lumber Museum, and you can actually see one of these camps. You've been?
Oh, yes.
Love it.
We all have that.
You all have? Everyone has? Oh, well, I'm telling you something.
Not me.
Not you? Well, you definitely need to go. But yeah, I mean, I'm impressed by it because what I'm talking about, I can kind of see it in full view. Yeah, go ahead.
So you mentioned, about them having a company store or a general store or whatever on the movable rail shantytown.
Sure.
I was looking at that picture you have there of the rafts.
Sure.
And that first float, you got a gentleman with a tie on and an apron.
Yeah, this was a kitchen.
And, okay, that was the kitchen?
Yep,
'Cause I was
that's where they
wondering if that
cooked.
might have been a shop of some kind, yeah. 'Cause
Nope.
it was different than the other ones, because the other one has a
Uh-huh.
horse on it
This is-
and just
Yep.
regular crews.
So they stayed in here, and then this was the kitchen. This is where this is how they ate and prepared probably the hospital or whatever it needed to be used for, but yeah, that's what that was.
Do you think they operated year-round until they completed the kitchen area?
Yeah, they did. Like I said, in the winter, they were typically out cutting, because it was the best time to cut. And it was slippery enough, easier to move them down the hill. And then the spring thaw, they were ready to move them down. But I didn't tell you, once they floated these rafts all the way down to Williamsport from my area. Like, I drove 3 hours to get here this morning. I'm from, well, I'm not from DuBois technically, I'm from Komonzci, but close there. And they walked from Williamsport back to home, wherever that be along the way. That's how they got home. You know, they floated those logs, so it was a long journey. So as you're asking, did they utilize all the seasons? Yeah, because it took them a while to get back from the spring thaw, and I don't know how long the journey actually took. I probably should. Usually I talk to students and not big groups of adults, so you know, freshen up a little bit. But like I said, they would have to walk all the way back from, well, it's 88 miles from here to my home, so they were walking that. And then in the summer, they would prepare stuff like the log slides and get the area prepared, and probably did some cutting too. And then,
But bark peeling was only done from April to August.
which
Maybe
is
September.
because the same as the sap, right? Like the bark's looser. It's not hard. It's not so hard to get off in that time of the year. So you're correct. Yeah. There's a lot of ghost towns. Someone said something about Shawmut. That was near. That's near St. Mary's, PA. That's a ghost town now. So one of these towns that we're just up, and you can see everything, wooden sidewalks and.
I think that's Norwich there.
Yep, you're
Norwich
right,
was
Norwich.
unusual that they did install sidewalks, but it came late in the era.
Yeah, you can see this is a much more, I don't know, just people are wearing different clothes here, and we're getting a little bit further into the newer part of the time period. And so, like I said earlier, I'm not necessarily, I don't have a degree in lumber or anything. This is pretty much what I've learned by looking at these pictures and reading some books. We're currently, has anybody ever heard of Thomas Tabor, the Thomas
Yes.
Tabor? So he has a series of books, as you know, and he personally wrote 7 of those books, okay? And he did not have them copyrighted, and I actually did meet the gentleman before he passed and got his permission, but we are reprinting them. So as you know now, Ellen, grab that one off that table so we can show them what they did look like.
Just the Tabor books, or?
Just the
was it
Tabor
Klein,
part of it.
Klein,
No.
Casper?
Yeah, no, just the Tabor part. So there's 7 books that he wrote, and they're going to be put into 2-volume series. And I've been lucky enough to have to proofread. Yeah. If I knew more of that, I would. And I apologize. I didn't realize that, maybe you would want me to talk about that. All I know is these came, like, I probably would know more if I were the one that was in on the initial when they found them. But my predecessor, he took care of all this for me, and I'm just kind of the sloppy seconds that you guys got stuck with.
Do you have the Smithsonian magazine that spoke of it? It was probably 30 years ago. And
I'm 51, I'll have you know.
I have that issue. If I can find it, I'll see if
I
I
would
can.
love to. I do not. We have a lot of
But
stuff.
it describes finding them, I think in Canandaigua, in a
It's in New York for sure.
garden shed or
A barn,
some
that's what I
kind of,
understand.
who would ever thought they'd be there
Mhm.
and would have survived. And Clarke, I think, was from Buffalo.
Mhm.
He was, I believe, a member of the board of directors of the Buffalo and Susquehanna Railroad. So he was a Goodyear friend, and I believe he was in Potter County for health reasons of all things. You know, who would think to go there for
Yeah,
respiratory issues?
we probably wouldn't in our day, but
But he spent a lot of his time going around to these places and photographing
that's what he
people,
did, yeah.
in their world. And
Well,
it
you-
was
I have
treasure.
more of these. We have a few more, but I only brought 2 boxes today. I'm almost out of time already, even with what I've talked about. But, you know, but there, you can tell in a lot of the pictures, well, like this one, you can see it's probably the only time they ever got their picture taken. So they put their good duds on, right?
Probably a Sunday.
Probably a Sunday, because again, no one's working, only day off, and they put their good duds on, so they all sat there for I don't know how long it took to take a picture. But again, my predecessor, he used to carry around like an old camera, because it was the kind, you know, you put your cloth over your head and you sit there for 30 seconds, or 30 minutes, excuse me, without moving, and to get your nice picture taken. So yeah, they probably put their good duds on for these a lot of times. Yes, ma'am.
Out of curiosity, I looked up $1 in 1800. It's apparently worth $23.88 today.
Well, then they weren't making horrible money with inflation considered, I guess. But it was $1 a day, typical pay. But they got fed and housed, and all their money pretty much went back to their families, or unless the families were with them, so.
Approximately what's the time frame of all of your collection?
So from the 1880s, start like in the 1880s to the 1920-ish,
Okay.
okay? That's kind of what I'm guessing these ones are.
Yeah, Norwich closed sometime in the 20s.
Yeah, 20, I mean, the lumber boom was over in the 40s, you know, but I mean, it was still very prominent, and still is today. Still very prominent today in our region. I just passed, and it was my first time going by that mill because I came in different. But the one in Gailton down here,
Yeah.
what mill, is that Patterson?
Patterson.
There was no name, I kept
Larimer
looking.
Larimer Norton's there too.
I saw Larimore Norton's on that one sign. So yeah, there's a huge mill up there. Yes, ma'am.
Last summer, last August, I have 18 acres of woods,
Okay.
and an Amish man from Addison, I think,
Mhm.
lumbered it with horses, like that, and the logs, some of them went to China.
That's where they go a lot now. If you'd like to hear any modern stuff.
It didn't clear cut, by the way, but there were some trees there that were worth enough money.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I guess the gentleman back here could probably bank on that, but the Chinese are very interested in our lumber. Matter of fact, our lumber from this part of Pennsylvania is internationally recognized. And the Chinese are very much interested in our lumber, and to the point where some of them buy up portions of land, or try, and then if not, a lot of our lumber yards, when you see big stacks of just logs, not the actual lumber, that's what they want, because they can get it processed over there, obviously, a lot less expensive than they can here. So they'll buy our cherries and our hardwoods, and we export a lot of them. So, yes, sir.
I should say something about the clear cutting. Certainly, there was clear cutting, but very often, the Goodyears, say, would come in and take the hemlock. They were hemlock lumber people. And of course, along the way, they would sell that bark. You would also have hardwoods that would be their own, hardwoods would have their own kind of market because of hardwood being what it is. And then there would also be the chemical wood. And all of these 3 distinct products were harvested at various times, often on the same ground. So you might have a contract to take the hemlock, but you had to leave the others for those other future customers.
Well, the thing about hemlock is a lot of times it was just left to rot because they didn't care about the wood. That is not, to me, that's mind blowing, right?
Hemlock was good for rough framing.
Framing.
A lot of houses were framed with it, but
And still are, right?
you wouldn't make furniture out of it.
Exactly. Else with these hardwoods, and we need to do that domestically and keep our product here.
Yeah, because they're going really cheap. My husband works at Conestoga Wood Specialties down in East Earl, and they do kitchen cabinet doors for places like KitchenAid and stuff like that. It takes specialized machinery, so KitchenAid will make the boxes and they'll do the doors and stuff. And he said they used to do a lot of the different cherries and different types of woods. And now they're actually offering a lot more pressed stuff because that's what the demand is for.
Yeah, we don't want that, and people are painting it. A lot of, if you see it, any magazine right now, your kitchen's gray or white, right, or black. So it's not natural finish. So they're doing a lot of painted woods, and that's what they're decorating with.
I'd like to comment that this is so wonderful to see these and be available to be understood and viewed. What is so impressive for me, having toured Potter County from when I was a teenager, the amount of industry that was here in what we might call the boonies was just amazing. And that this illustrates so much of it. Further, the notion of human physical labor
Yes.
is just all through this. And today, do we have any appreciation for what it took to survive, to have a living, to raise family, to live in a place like this?
We don't, and that's why when you think of me taking this, most of the presentations I do is luckily Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, when you're in 3rd grade, you have to get a local history lesson. You know, you have to go through at least local history stuff. I do these presentations like for whole counties at a time where there's 400 kids, or you know, just single schools or whatever. So I guess what I'm trying to say is maybe in my hopes, that we're making them understand that there are jobs that you can do in your backyard. I did a series recently, it's called Boom Heritage, and no, it wasn't Boom Heritage, it was Legends of Lumbering, where we interviewed some families from around the region that have been at least 4 generations, and that's something that I'm showing also to the kids. They're trying to push, like, look at the happiness and how it's family-oriented, and, you know, yeah, it's hard work, but it's in your blood, right, sir? You can say, like, you have to kind of have it in your blood to be there, but we need to teach these kids that it's important. We have sawmills all over that can't hire. You know, well, I don't think we need to talk much about the workforce right now and how we're struggling with it, right? But the only way that we're going to bring it back at all is to try to educate. So maybe that's something that I'm doing to help with what you just said.
Very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you.